Technology companies are facing a round of massive layoffs. At the time of publishing this video, thousands of families are in the street because of hundreds of bad decisions and other determining factors that we will analyze in this documentary. Why are technology companies laying off employees? It all started at the beginning of the year with the fall of the smallest companies in the sector. Yet the situation did not take long to spread and affect the giants of the industry. A few weeks ago, Amazon said it planned to lay off 10,000 employees. Meanwhile, Meta just laid off 11,000 workers, and Elon Musk plans to lay off more Twitter staff after conducting one of the most extensive purges in the industry. The key here is that every company has laid off a small or bigger number of its employees. And this isn't a coincidence. In fact, it would take us less time to mention those companies that have not laid off a single worker this year. Because of the crisis, big-name companies such as Netflix, Coinbase, Shopify, Uber, Robinhood, Zillow, and Airbnb have drastically reduced employee headcount. The layoffs were so significant that a website was dedicated to tracking all of the recent firings in the industry. But why are we in this situation? And is there any reason behind this whole mess? At least I think there is a logical explanation. The round of mass layoffs is related to the pandemic. However, the reasons linking the two crises differ entirely from what you might think. It was not the economic downturn that caused this round of mass layoffs, but the excessive hiring during the pandemic. But why was it necessary to hire so many people? During the pandemic years, most of us had no choice but to lock ourselves inside of our homes. Offices and schools were closed, as were bars and restaurants. In other words, we couldn't go out. However, our consumerist society has found a way to buy things on the internet. Thanks to COVID, online activity increased dramatically, leading to huge profits for many technology companies. Companies like Google, Zoom, Facebook, and Twitter began to amass a lot of money. Online shopping also increased steadily. People had nowhere to spend their money, so they began to waste it in multiple online stores. It's no news that Amazon had one of its best years during the pandemic. Netflix and Amazon Prime became the perfect replacement for cinema, increasing subscriptions like never before. Everyone surfed for hours on social media, leading to ad revenue skyrocketing. Even in the wake of global uncertainty, the increase of online activity led to hundreds of businesses to venture into the online world. Many retailers and wholesalers began selling online to reach a wider audience. Others had to do it to survive. Since some people had to run this whole system, technology companies began to expand their workforce. As a result, the tech industry reached historical revenue levels, but unfortunately, there was a problem. The supply of workers was not able to meet the demand. Every firm wanted to hire more professionals, so technology leaders had to offer higher salaries to attract the best engineers and technology workers. But they did it because they believed that a new era had begun. Even most entrepreneurs thought that the world would go remote forever. But unfortunately, the fantasy didn't last long. After anticipating this new way of life would last forever, technology leaders hired staff accordingly, and they also worked on new projects, expanded their teams, and began to proliferate. The massive hiring of workers was also exacerbated by the fact that some companies require more staff than they need. If a Facebook team needs 50 workers, the company may have 55 or 60 employees in that area. This is not to say that technology firms love to pay extra salaries, but they must do so to be protected in case of any eventuality. Let's say Twitter will need 5,000 employees to be up and running, and it has 5,000 employees exactly. What do you think would happen if one of them suddenly quit? If Twitter's website would go down for a day, how many millions would the company lose compared to what it can save by hiring an extra employee? It's pretty common to see workers switch companies in exchange for better pay in the industry. Since the demand for workers is very high in the tech sector, companies like TikTok and Shopify need to ensure that they have enough qualified personnel to carry out their tasks. This situation led to many companies hiring more workers than they needed. However, with so many revenue streams coming from everywhere, no one would have been able to foresee that things would end up changing at any moment. Layoffs have not been the only tool employed by large technology companies. Some experts say that pay cuts could start to become more common. But if tech workers start getting cut back, who will be next? The post-COVID world proved to be very different than tech leaders expected. While the remote numbers of workers vastly improved compared to pre-pandemic, the loss of profits was too great for CEOs not to have felt it in their pockets. So while companies like Google Meet and Zoom are still widely used, they went from being the only viable option for having a work meeting to becoming an alternative. Despite this, the hybrid workplace has become much more critical. Many employers want their employees to spend some time in the office so they can learn about the company culture and get to know their coworkers. Having your employees in the office gives you greater control over your business. Many business owners would rather have a team of professionals in their offices than entrust the security of their sensitive data to some guys at home in their pajamas. Even if the situation could have been worse for enterprise meeting software, the entertainment and e-commerce sectors have suffered severely from the lack of new users. Since the pandemic has stopped, life outside the office is back to what it was a few years ago. People go out to the park and walk their dogs, they go to the bar with their friends, and invite their partners to restaurants for dinner. Many of these activities have dramatically increased. After 2 years of being deprived of our freedom, the last thing people want is to spend another week locked up with their phones. Unfortunately, people having returned to their old lifestyles is terrible news for the technology industry because the tech leaders have a large pool of employees trained to meet a non-existent demand. The second issue was that many of these workers demanded higher pay. Now, we're not talking about administrative staff earning $10 an hour, but engineers, software developers, and highly skilled personnel earning salaries over 6 figures. If companies were overstaffed, but there was a chance that the situation would improve, or if growth prospects were healthy for the sector, these massive layoffs would never have occurred. It may not be great for any business to pay extra wages for an entire year, but that won't put any large company like Google out of business. Unfortunately, things began to go wrong when the short-term future no longer looked promising. After months of high inflation, everything indicates that the United States is headed for a new recession. As a result, the dollar is worth less than ever, and the euro and pound sterling has fallen to one of their lowest levels against the US currency. Even gold has lost value. Stock prices and cryptocurrency have fallen sharply, and the real estate industry is in a bubble waiting to burst. After the central bank announced its 4th consecutive 0.75% increase, layoffs continued to mount. Some point out that the situation will not end until the Federal Reserve can control inflation. Going into a recession means that consumer spending and advertising revenue will be much lower. Advertising is one of the mainstays of technology companies, so suffering a reduction in this revenue means incurring hundreds to billions of dollars in losses. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve is trying to control the highest inflation in 4 decades by uncontrollably raising interest rates. This has led to many high-risk investors to invest in more conservative assets to protect their capital from the impending crisis. Among the companies leading the massive layoffs is Meta, followed by Elon Musk's company Twitter, which reportedly laid off 50% of its workforce. Meanwhile, amid the chaos, Twitter's co-founder and former executive, Jack Dorsey, took full responsibility and apologized for growing his company too quickly. In August 2022, the firm behind Snapchat, Snap Inc., plans to lay off about 20% of its more than 6,400 employees and shelve several projects. Snap expects to save $500 million from reduced operating expenses. But behind these figures lies the future of nearly 1,300 people. Yet, it doesn't look like entrepreneurs like Elon Musk or Zuckerberg are willing to go bankrupt to keep a few jobs, especially after the computer giant Microsoft was forced to lay off nearly 1,000 employees. In recent months, Meta has made far less money than it planned to raise. As a result, some companies in the sector are preparing to receive 2023 with much lower revenues than estimated. Because of this, technology companies need to control their expenses to ensure their survival during one of the most turbulent and volatile economic periods in history. Meanwhile, the European energy crisis and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine have not made things any better. We have a documentary dedicated to this crisis. You will find the link in the description. After the loss of revenues led to a drastic drop in stock prices, the main affected have been the small and medium-sized investors who invested all their savings in the biggest technology companies in the industry. Investors are not interested in moral issues or the spirit. Instead, they want to protect their money and make some extra cash. That is why investors' main concern is whether the companies in which they are invested plan to take action to stabilize their profits and avoid going bankrupt. For example, if Elon Musk had not fired most of Twitter's employees, stock prices would have continued to fall. Most of the current layoffs have occurred at a time when the technology industry was willing to take on less financial risk as borrowing costs rise. As a result of market pressures, many technology leaders have had to lay off staff to make shareholders happy. If costs are high, the CEOs of technology firms need to remedy this situation as soon as possible. For some startups or growth stage companies, massive layoffs indicate a firm is in trouble. That's why navigating modern investing has become more complicated than ever. It's not easy to differentiate which companies are downsizing as a part of a natural cycle from those about to close their doors, especially when we have such a high and uneven rate of layoffs. According to Layoffs FYI, the website that tracks layoffs in the tech sector, 242,398 employees at 1,463 tech companies have been laid off since the pandemic. Large, once thriving companies are now facing a major recession due to the failing demand. However, it would be a mistake to say that the crisis in the technology sector has been caused solely by problems in the global economy. In some cases, the answer is much simpler than we imagine. When the pandemic broke out, there were many companies benefited from it. Among them was TikTok. In recent years, TikTok has become one of the most popular social networks in the world. The problem is that it has taken attention from most social networks. So after the world went back to normal, companies like Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, and Instagram found themselves facing a never-before-seen scenario. They were being replaced by a competitor they couldn't beat. Today, TikTok threatens to become the new search engine for Generation Z and replace YouTube. Although it would be an exaggeration to say that TikTok has caused the downfall of the technology sector, it has not been doing its competitors any favor. According to a recent study, users tend to spend more time on the TikTok app than on YouTube. This caused profits, which were already declining, to fall further. For that reason, many advertisers have decided to migrate to this new platform, making the crisis also impact content creators. The secret to understanding the massive layoffs in the technology sector is to know that the economy works as a whole. If people lose their jobs, they spend less money, so companies need less employees, and this causes a shortage of money. Some economists, such as Jan Hatzius of Goldman Sachs, points out that tech layoffs are not signs of an impending recession. Even if most of the tech sector were to lose their jobs at once, the unemployment rate would barely increase by 0.3%. Therefore, we would not feel the impact directly. For Neela Richardson, chief economist at payroll processing firm ADP, the Twitter and Meta layoffs are unique corporate events that are not necessarily tied to the broader labor market. The tech layoffs have not made a noticeable mark on weekly unemployment insurance claims. But no matter what the statistics or the specialists say, there is one situation that no one can deny. In the coming weeks, thousands of families worldwide will have trouble making ends meet. This could aggravate our tragic situation if the industry does not change quickly, but we don't have any guarantee that this will happen. Although there is no such thing as a guarantee when it comes to macroeconomic issues, we know one thing for sure. Economic downturns are cyclical, so after the period of massive layoffs, the tech moguls may start hiring again. But how long will we have to wait for this to happen? Well, no one knows the answer. While experts agree that we are likely to face a recession as severe as the Great Recession of 2008, all indications are that we will face a minor recession next year. Therefore, we can assume that the wave of massive layoffs are not yet over. Yet, when the recession hits, the technology industry will not be the only one affected. Technology companies do not rely solely on engineers and system analysts. They also have janitors, security guards, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers. Unfortunately, these roles could also face cuts if the situation worsens. According to Unite Here Local 2 union officials representing hospitality workers in Silicon Valley, Facebook has not yet laid off cafeteria workers. Still, they have begun freezing positions about 2 months ago. The occupation most affected during COVID-19 was low-wage workers who offered their services in high-wage industries. So even those who don't work in the sector should start worrying about what's coming and how this crisis will impact their families. The only certainty that we have this far is that this crisis has been caused by massive hiring. But if there's one thing I've learned from this wave of mass layoffs, it is that when the real recession begins, many companies will follow the example of Facebook and Meta to protect their interests. The great failure of the metaverse led Zuckerberg to lose much of his fortune and caused many companies in the sector to temporarily lose their motivation to invest in new technologies. Due to the lack of new projects, thousands of people will have to keep waiting to enter one of the best-paying industries in the world. In the meantime, studies indicate that we are in a period where tech giants have only one thing on their minds: protecting their money. This is not a time for experimentation. This is a time for technology companies to recover from their losses. Today, the information services sector accounts for about 2% of the U.S. workforce. Even if the thousands of layoffs have discouraged tech workers, there is still hope for them to gain employment in other sectors. Some economists have taken a much more positive view on the situation and point out that other industries need the help of these laid-off professionals. Among them, the government, health services, education, and retail can all benefit from the engineers and data scientists. The effects of the pandemic caused the technology sector to enjoy high salaries, which, as good as they were unrealistic for the market. As a result, technology companies were overzealous in hiring because as soon as the isolation ended and people returned to their daily lives, problems erupted. Excessive hiring led to thousands of people losing their jobs. As a consequence, stocks are down, and some companies have been accused of being a scam. That is why I believe that many software vendors will not survive in the coming months. Only those with a small team or the courage to fix the bugs of the pandemic will make it through. The changes in the industry will result in many programmers and engineers being hired where they are most needed. The bad news is that we don't know how long the layoffs will continue, so some industry specialists may have to spend more than one season looking for a new employer. In conclusion, the labor recession may have only just begun, so depending on what happens in the first months of 2023, we could find ourselves in one of the most critical moments in our history. But even if things start to change for the better today, it will take years to repair the damage done. But what do you think of the big tech layoffs, guys? Let us know in the comments below and click on the next video to learn how the energy crisis is tearing apart Europe. See you soon.